Hey GP learners, and welcome to this roundup session that we've got following our first day at the RCGP annual conference in Liverpool. We've had a hectic and busy day, and it's probably going to get even busier tomorrow, but we're going to cover everything that we've been doing today, our experiences, what we found, and basically talking you through the RCGP conference. Let's take enhance your primary care and learning. Hey GP learners. So as we said, we're going to be talking about basically our experience of the first day of the RCGP conference. Just a reminder, it's in Liverpool, 2021. And it changed a lot, didn't it, Andy, from what we were expecting?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting day. I think this sort of broadcast should be really helpful for those people at home, perhaps watching the online streams, or haven't been fortunate enough to be here. And also if you're here in your hotel room, maybe watching live, that's great. Say hello to us tomorrow. Yeah, it's been different to previous conferences that I've been to in years gone by. A little bit smaller.
Yes, definitely. So I think previous conferences, we've been in the main auditorium and it's been packed out, people sitting on the stairs. It's been, full to the brim, shall we say. Definitely not the case from this morning's main plenary session. That may have been because of the last minute change that we had from the plenary. So for those that aren't aware, Secretary of State for Health, Sajid Javid, was due to have come to the conference. He unfortunately cancelled about half an hour to go, so not long, and decided to go, I think, other places instead of coming here. Those were his priorities apparently. But we opened the conference with a bang, with Martin talking about basically the challenges ahead of us, and a pretty good speech, to be honest.
Yeah, it was good. It was nice to see Martin talking. I think each chair of the Royal College sort of brings their own attributes to the role. I think what struck me was that Martin has a really sort of well thought out, strategic mind and plan and take on things. And I thought that was really, really welcome. I think that's what we need in these times, really. Some things that struck me were, it was quite a moving part was actually when he put some photos up of GPs that have sadly lost their lives in the last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was really, really moving. And I was really glad he did that, actually, because that was really, really important to do. The other thing as well, we can't not talk about the letter that came out yesterday evening, this morning. But Martin was really, really clear that he was very disappointed with the content of the letter, that he did not endorse it in any way, and that he thought that it was definitely not the answer to the problems that patients are facing getting access to their GPs at this time. And I thought that was really good to see someone at the top of the college coming out with a very clear message on that.
So I guess the key thing I've heard is that, that the college, along with the BMA, had 4 key asks of the government when they were looking at resources to help, general practice. It seems that they've come back on only one of them, which was the stuff around security and enforcement of abuse to staff and things, and possibly some of the other minor things around workload and things. But then the other things, which I don't know what they were, basically ignored, and here's some money to do some stuff, which we're all questioning how we're going to find the workforce and all the other requirements that come with that money question. But we are not going to go into depth in that, because otherwise we'll get distracted, and actually we're going to cover that in more detail for our review of the letter itself. But there was more to come after that. So we had a rousing session just after Martin finished talking, didn't we?
Well, Chris Whitty, but I want to keep things in chronological order, Gandhi, because you disappeared from, you were sat next to me during Martin's speech and for some parts of Chris Whitty's speech, and you kept leaving, and I think to appear on BBC Breakfast and some other things, which I think was unexpected for you. Just tell us what happened there.
So I got a call first thing in the morning, whilst we were actually just after we'd registered for the conference. And if you do want to check out our walkthrough of the registration process, feel free to check on the GP Learning channel. We kind of did that for those of you that haven't had that experience at conference or may never want to have that experience, but actually you can see what it's like. Sidebar there for you. But got a call from BBC asking me if I wanted to come on. I thought they were talking about radio, which I was like, okay, fine, as long as you can just tell me when. Happened to be when I thought Sajid Javid was going to be here, so I was like, maybe not. But I was like, okay, let's go for it. Turned out it was TV. Turned out it was BBC Breakfast Show. Didn't know that. Last minute adjustment of what we were talking about and things, but actually I'm hoping it came across well. I mean, you can tell me, I was in the moment, to be honest. But then even more bizarrely, as soon as I finished that, I then heard from BBC 5 Live kind of saying, well, you've just been on TV, would you like to come talk to our radio team? Really nice. And the obviously I had more time with BBC 5 Live. One thing I did want to say, there was some really nice stories from patients about the positives and some of the challenges they've had with access. And not going to deny it, there were definitely some challenges there, but actually the supportive messages, I was touched, to be honest, some of the comments that were said. And I think, recognizing, we all know there's challenges in general practice, we know there's difficulties and stuff, and whether the letter and the funding helps, we'll go into that later. But yeah, it was an interesting start to the day, an exhausting one, to be honest.
Yeah, I was really impressed. You were able to make yourself available very, very quickly for these organisations.
Well, I'm keen to know what other people thought. So whether I did well or not, I happy to take critique and comments and stuff. And please let me know what you think, to be honest, and let us know in the comments, because I genuinely am interested to know. Because to be honest, I can't remember half of what I said.
It's nice to hear that the patients were quite supportive, and I think that echoes one of the points that Chris Whitty made pretty early on in his talk to the conference, which was that doctors and GPs are still the most trusted professionals when you ask the public their opinions, and it's really good to hear the kind of recent feedback and recent evidence backs that up, and that's acknowledged by Professor Whitty. I thought it was really interesting and perhaps telling that Professor Whitty did make the journey up to the RCGP conference as planned. He sat and had a really nice, almost sort of fireside chat, an interview with Martin Marshall, the chair, and was very, very supportive of general practice, very, very supportive of the work that general practice has done and are continuing to do. And that was just really, really nice to see. He made some interesting comments about his own role, and he was saying that actually as Chief Medical Officer, he feels it's his role to be a doctor first and say what a doctor would say in the room. And I thought it was really nice. He just came across just extremely well.
I think the thing that stood out for me, so having been to several conferences before, we've had very special people come on and give talks and that kind of stuff. Even when Professor Whitty came on, you could feel the appreciation that the audience had for him. I mean, he almost had a standing round of applause before he even started talking. And I've not felt that before from a conference environment. So I think there's definitely an appreciation that the profession had for Professor Whitty. But equally, pretty much the first thing he said, the reason I've come today is simply to say thank you to general practice. And that was touching, to be honest. Yeah, that was really different, wasn't it? That was his aim. All the other stuff, he was just very open. And at the start of it, my main reason for coming, the reason why I travelled 8 hours to get to the conference, yes, he travelled 8 hours to get to conference, was just to come and say thank you to general practice. He did warn us there's challenges to come, unfortunately, recognising that the winter's coming and the winter's going to bring, Game of Thrones style, I think it's going to bring some real problems for us. But very much he saw the general practice was going to unfortunately be at the forefront of that, and we have some serious challenges coming. But absolutely, you could it was something you could feel.
Yeah, it was good, and he did get a standing ovation at the end. That was really, really good. I think I caught that on clip and put it on Twitter because I thought that was really moving, which was good. Just the final thing about that whole opening plenary, I'm just wondering what was going on with Sajid Javid, because he obviously said he was coming. Probably thought that he was coming up until this morning. There was obviously a planned release of the letter and the announcements around access to primary care and the funding and the requirements that are all wrapped up with that. And he then, when he knew that was coming, so it wasn't a surprise to him that was happening, but he cancelled his appearance here in order to appear on national television to talk about this announcement, which he could have made from conference. What's happening, Gandhi?
I don't know. I think whether there's that question. I mean, people are going to question his motives, why he changed his mind. And he was a relatively last-minute addition as well. So this wasn't that he was always going to come. This was new addition, last-minute cancellation. Didn't feel that he even wanted to remote in like Matt Hancock has done previously when he was Secretary of State for conferences. Recognizing that they are busy people. That things happen. Fair enough. But choosing to go on national TV instead of coming to face general practice. I mean, the whole focus of this letter and his directives is very much for GPs to have more face-to-face contact, whereas Sajid Javid feels he doesn't want to face the profession. That was my impression I took from it. And I think that says something about motives and things. But there may be other stuff we're not aware of. We are by no means governmental officials that have this kind of knowledge, but I think actions speak louder than words, and to me it's like he was hiding.
I think they anticipated how it was going to land, and didn't want it to land at the RCGP conference where they'd have faced a lot of resistance about it, and he would have drawn a lot of media with him who would have been centered around the RCGP conference. I remember when Jeremy Hunt spoke a few years ago, and that ITN was there. There were a lot more reporters who were talking to the delegates about what he'd said, and I think they just wanted to avoid that sort of news cycle. But
it raises a question about a Secretary of State for Health that is saying that general practice, well, he's now finally saying that general practice is a valued part of the healthcare service, when previously he's not been as sympathetic. But then actively choosing to not engage with general practice, avoiding us in some ways. I think that says a lot about his view of general practice, and actually, again, actions speak louder than words. And what do those actions mean then?
Yeah, so
let's move on to something more fun.
Let's talk about just kind of what we did throughout the day.
Yeah.
And what we took away from some of the sessions, I think, because again, it's good, gives people a good flavour of the type of content at the conference.
Absolutely.
And the sort of stuff that they might be able to indulge in if they come to the conference in the future. So I've got the day one sessions up on the screen. It's going to be really quite small, but you can get an idea of the structure.
Yeah, let's bring it up, shall we?
Let me zoom in a little bit more.
There we go.
So so after the plenary, what did you do next, Gandhi?
So we had a brief break, and then we had the second plenary, which was Dr. Devi. I've forgotten
Sridhar.
So many of you have probably seen her on a lot of the COVID debriefs and that kind of stuff. Professional in public health, really well spoken, just amazing to listen to, and just basically laying it out what happened with COVID and what needs to happen in the future in particular. So, what needs to change, how we need to have a better response to things like a pandemic situation and how that can happen. It was just nice, informative, clear, just good session.
A little bit of sense of humour as well.
Absolutely.
Professor Sridhar, she's really good to watch and good to listen to. She sort of talked about what we could have anticipated, what we did anticipate, what we didn't anticipate, and what we can anticipate next time. So that was really nice structure to that session. I think after that, did you go to the respiratory update session, Gavin?
Yep. So I went to respiratory update talking about diagnosis and management of asthma and COPD, which you all know is a little bit challenged since we've kind of had we had a pause of spirometry in particular because it was an AGP procedure, so aerosol generating procedure, meaning that it wasn't safe to do in COVID. There were some tips of how to do that now moving forward, in that you can use special filters to help and a controlled force expiration, I can't remember the exact term, rather than the big huff kind of thing that we normally recommend patients to do, and some other things, or maybe looking at hubs. But definitely update in terms of managing asthma, diagnosis of asthma in particular, and management, moving towards what sounds like more the smart treatments as a priority rather than SABA and ICS based. And similarly with COPD, focusing on the importance of treatment, how to manage it, and non-medical treatment was the key thing I took from that. Really useful session for me personally. I think there was a couple of big take-home ones, particularly asthma stuff. Really appreciate the speakers, whose names unfortunately I've forgotten. Apologies on that, but they were high quality. And if you do have the opportunity to watch that session again, definitely recommend it.
Good. The session I went to at that time was this session in the RCGP Priorities stream about reviving relationship-based care in the post-COVID world. And it was a really interesting session, I think because of the questions it raised, to be quite honest. So we had Amanda Howe and Martin Marshall from the college, just really extolling the values of relationship-based care. So that's that type of care where you know your patients, they know you, there's a high degree of trust in that relationship, there is continuity of care, and you can draw on that trust to get better outcomes, better compliance, better patient satisfaction. And they had a patient that came on and described a pre-COVID experience of having a really good episode of care, joining a new practice and developing a really, really good relationship with that GP. But at the end of that story, he talked about how, COVID came, I decided to see the GP less, he retired, he's gone away, and I'm not quite sure how things would have gone now if I was joining that GP practice for the first time and trying to create a relationship with a new GP. And sort of therein lies the problem I had with the session, because they then had I forget the GP's name, but she talked about how people have been using remote care during the pandemic and what remote care is, and gave some definitions. I would say we don't really know yet what the outcomes from remote care are in terms of the clinical outcomes and how comparable they are to face-to-face care. And even it's unclear about patient satisfaction. It's very popular with some people,
Absolutely.
People who work, and it's quite unpopular with other sections of the population as well. And the session never really brought those two together for me. And actually, I was left thinking, these two things are at odds with one another. It's very difficult to see how you can have relationship-based care when you're having a lot of remote individual episodes of care, often with different people. I didn't really resolve that. I think there's more work needed was really how I was left. So that was interesting.
That would frustrate me, to be honest.
Yeah, Martin Marshall did talk about a technique he has called, what did he call it? It's like rapid relationship building, where you can get good at building rapport really quickly with patients, and how you can have informational continuity. So if people are careful to document things about when patients are going on holiday, all of this kind of meta history that you learn about a patient's lives, if people get in the habit of documenting that, then the next person can pick it up and give that kind of continuity without the relationship. So there were some mitigating things, but I was left feeling a little bit dissatisfied. They did a great job in talking through the topic, but a little bit dissatisfied. So what did you do next, Gandhi?
So after that, I went to the prescribing debate, talking about pharmacogenomics.
Me too.
And its use in future. So interesting debate. I think pretty much majority of the room and the vote supported this, that pharmacogenetics, has possibly a place in very situational places, but at the moment is not the priority of general practice.
Yeah, not ready, and not a priority. There are other things that we could spend our time doing at the moment that would pay off.
It was a nice debate.
It was good. Yeah, I enjoyed it. There was lunch and networking. We met some of our
So interesting, I had to do a PCN meeting during lunch, which was definitely interesting. Hats off to my PCN for letting me be able to do that and engage and stuff. And, talking about, for example, the letter, a couple of other things we had to focus on as well. So yeah, thanks to my PCN for letting me do that and things. But then caught lunch briefly, and then we kicked off with the afternoon session. I can't quite remember what I went to now.
Well, pick out what I went to. I go to?
I went to the fellowship session, so looking at supporting fellowships, and particularly shout out to James Waldron and Rebecca. Rebecca, my tongue's gone. Who are from Nottingham, fellow GPs, and talking about the Phoenix program, which is our local thing to try and encourage GPs to stay on in the area, as well as looking at fellowships from both the Trailblazers, which is their main focus, as well as the mid-career fellowships, which obviously now become part of the contract. Really interesting to hear how the journey developed into creating these kind of roles and leading to retention, as well as better engagement in some elements of the different roles.
Cool. And I went to the Recovering from COVID-19, which was a talk about long COVID, essentially, covering definitions of long COVID, how it affects people, and how we can support them with their recovery. It's still pretty much unknown, really, what the pathophysiology is behind long COVID, and it may be complex, and there may be lots of different physical and psychological things going on. But it really talked about practical places that you can signpost patients to, like your COVID recovery, for example, website, to help them recover. And it was really just about making sure there isn't anything else going on that is giving people these symptoms before you give them a label, and then really just helping them to recover by treating them symptomatically. Identify what the problems are and help them through those with either prescribing or social or psychological support and graded activity. And that's what we will be doing until we know a bit more about the pathophysiology and perhaps have some more targeted treatments or greater understanding of the condition. And
shout out to friends of the GP Learning Channel, Dr. Amy Small and Tony Hazel, who were running that session and basically talking some amazing stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic. And then in the later bit of the afternoon, so I went to the LGBTQI health session, which was really, really interesting, actually. There was Duncan, I forgot Duncan's name, I know Duncan, but there were some GPs that I know running the session. And they did some case studies looking at things like PrEP and HIV, looking at a presentation of people with sort of gender dysmorphia and transgender issues, it was really good, and heard some personal stories from the people presenting as well that kind of made it all really real. And I think a thrust about it was just how to create a welcoming atmosphere for people of those communities where they can feel sort of safe discussing their health. The other thing that was really quite sad at the beginning was just identifying that people in these categories often have much, as I say often, because many people actually are kind of fine psychologically in these groups, but a higher proportion of the general population have incidents of suicide attempts and depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems, which is sort of sad to hear. So there's perhaps more that we can do to help those communities. Gandhi, what did you do?
So I went to the session on shared decision making and how to encourage that. It was an interesting session, various people speaking, including Sam, I'm going to say this wrong, Finnegan, who is basically leading the part of this. I think the reason why I went to that particular session, some of you may be aware, there's an e-learning portion of shared decision making, then a mandatory part of PCN DES. So I wanted to kind of get some heads up on what that was looking like and stuff. And it was a really useful session. What I felt really validated about was the way they were talking, was how I think I practice in general practice. So I think I'm doing all right, which is nice. Obviously there's some mandatory e-learning, unfortunately, that we'll now all have to do as part of the PCN DES. But it was still a really useful session, and they asked my question as well, which was always nice.
That's good. So always
questions. We haven't talked about this actually. So one massive change that's come from the conference is previously people used to get up, talk, and ask questions through the microphone.
Cue behind the microphones.
Yeah, especially for the big plenary sessions. So the big difference this year, it's all through the conference app that they provide, which has, I think, benefits and downsides. Downsides, you don't actually know who's asked the question, which I know from some of the speakers they've said has been a bit of an interesting thing. Positives, though, I think do in some ways outweigh it. So the questions are much shorter. Yay! Yep. We used to have some proper rambles when it came to questions previously. And also people get to upvote the questions. It's kind of like a Slido mechanism. So the popular questions come to the top. And so you're hopefully getting more bang for buck in terms of answering the questions that are most relevant to the audience that you're speaking with. So I think it's really positive, but it is definitely a change for how things used to work.
I think it's definitely positive. Definitely get more questions in. Definitely get high quality questions. The thing that you miss is sometimes, when people stood up and you got to see who it was.
Back and forth as well.
Sometimes there was a back and forth, and sometimes they made some sort of, quite impassioned, relevant statement.
Yeah.
The downside of that is often sometimes people were just getting on kind of personal soapboxes sometimes, and not asking a question but just making a really long point. So it cuts that out, but you just miss the occasional, little great piece from someone from the floor. But yeah, positive change all in all.
Yep.
And then we both went to the same final session, which was the optimizing outcomes for women's health concerns via remote consultations where appropriate. Lots of caveats in that title. I thought it was a really good session actually, and I think it helped me simplify how I think about a number of the common presentations for women's health that are happening kind of over the phone initially, to what have been over the last year in terms of people seeking contraception, people with menstrual bleeding issues, and with cyclical pain. And really, you can do a lot more over the phone than I perhaps have been doing. And actually, you can get away with a bit less observations and physical examination than I perhaps thought. I still might bring in people just because you can build that trust and they know that they've been understood and so forth. But it left me feeling a bit more relaxed about what I have been doing and what I can do in the future.
Absolutely. And I think for me, part of that session was about, the fact that when you think about things you can manage remotely, gynae possibly isn't the first one that comes to mind. Because inevitably, if you have to examine the patient, it's not really an exam you can do remotely, let's be honest on that point. But the tips and stuff from the speakers, and just a big, massive shout out to the two speakers. So Dr. Tony Hazel, again, excellent as ever, e-learning kind of like guru when it comes to the RCGP and stuff as well. And also to the absolutely legendary Dr. Anne Connolly, who I've had years ago the pleasure of working with. But, effectively the person to know about gynae stuff in primary care, basically.
Very no nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. Very clear cut. Do this, don't do this, need to worry about this. It was just educational, informative. key take home I got from it, and I remember this message from Anne previously, we probably do more ultrasounds than we need to do when it comes to gynae stuff. So actually ultrasounds have not as much utility for managing gynecological conditions as many of us probably think and practice with. And being aware of the points where it is definitely useful and the points where it's not useful, particularly increased use of hysteroscopies possibly.
More favourite hysteroscopies rather than ultrasounds. Targeted hysteroscopies for certain indications.
And that finished the day. After that, we basically headed back to give you all this roundup of our session from day one. And we've also been preparing for our session on day 2. So if you are at the conference, feel free to come and join us in session H3, where we're going to be talking about content creation for both your own portfolio career as well as for your practice. And particularly, we've seen some really useful stuff around this in terms of how practice engage with the local community through social media and other routes. And we're going to basically give you all of our secret sauce when it comes to all of this stuff. So everything we're doing now, you're going to get tomorrow at the conference. So if you are at the conference, definitely come join us. And if you're joining remotely, absolutely dial in for our session H3.
So Gandhi, tonight it's conference Thursday night.
Yep.
Do you have any nice plans for the evening?
So I'm going to go meet some friends for dinner. You're going to the RCGP social.
I am. I'll tell you all about it in the morning.
Yep. And so definitely join us in the morning. So we're going to go live at 6:45. Was that correct? No, 7:45. Sorry. 7:45 in the morning. We're going to be going live again for our breakfast rollout, and then shortly after that, we're actually jumping into a stream for Nottingham.
Yep.
So all big shout out to all our Nottingham GPs. We'll be joining you for the morning ICS stream thing that we do every Friday, and then we're going to be filming hopefully some cool stuff at the conference and letting you know what it's been like on day 2 of the RCGP annual conference. Any final words, Andy?
No, I don't think so. I'll see you in the morning, bright and early.
Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow morning, guys. Catch you then.